pick up 2 bags of flour in the same supermarket aisle. One is plain, unbranded, and costs under $2 a kilo. The other sits in a rustic paper sack with a hand-drawn wheat sheaf, priced at more than triple that. Check the protein percentage on both nutrition panels, the number that actually determines how your dough rises and behaves, and in plenty of cases, it's nearly identical, sometimes down to a fraction of a gram. That gap between what you're paying and what you're actually getting is bigger, and far more common than most home bakers ever stop to check. We put 9 of the country's most popular flour products under real scrutiny, weighing price per kilogram against the numbers that genuinely matter for baking. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which pricing tricks to watch for and how to tell a genuine premium from a well-designed bag. Let's start with the mildest markup on the list. Here's how this countdown was built. Every entry is judged on 4 things: the price gap per kilogram compared to standard commodity flour, how far the front of bag artisan or regional story strays from what the back panel actually discloses, whether there's any real single origin verification behind the story, and how the protein content stacks up against the price being asked for it. Commodity wheat in Australia is graded almost entirely by protein content, which means the objective baking data is sitting right there on the nutrition panel of every bag, whether it's $2 or $12. No special equipment required to check it yourself. That doesn't make packaging design or storytelling illegal. Brands are entirely within their rights to build a premium identity around a product, and plenty of shoppers are happy to pay for the experience that identity provides. It just means the test here isn't, is this flour expensive? It's, does the price reflect something genuinely different inside the bag? Let's get into it. Number 9, the Ancient Grain Purist D blend. Flour blends built around a small percentage of an ancient or heritage grain, spelt horizon, einkorn, dressed up in premium packaging and priced well above standard baker's flour. These blends often turn up on shelves marketed towards shoppers looking for something that feels more nutritious or artisanal than plain white flour. Check the ingredient list, ordered by weight as it's legally required to be, and the heritage grain named proudly on the front often sits well down that list, behind standard wheat flour making up the overwhelming bulk of the blend. Some of these products run at under 5% ancient grain inclusion, which is enough to legitimately name it on the label, but not necessarily enough to meaningfully change the nutritional profile of what you're eating. That's not illegal, and if the small addition genuinely changes flavor or texture in a way you enjoy, that's a fair reason to pay for it. But if you're buying it purely chasing a health boost, the ingredient order tells you how much of that boost is really there. From botanical blending, let's follow the marketing further onto the label of a specific Australian region. Number 8, the Regional Heritage Lushan flour, named after a specific, picturesque Australian growing region. A valley, a plain, a district known for good wheat, with a vintage font and a small illustrated map to match, sometimes even a family name suggesting generations of local farming. The back of the bag tells a different story. Australia's country of origin labelling rules require an origin bar or statement showing where the ingredients actually come from, and in a lot of cases, that statement reveals grain blended from multiple states rather than the single named region on the front. This isn't a legal breach. Blending grain from different regions is a completely standard way millers keep quality and supply consistent through droughts, floods, and seasonal swings that a single region product simply can't buffer against on its own. It just means the romantic single origin story on the front and the practical multi-region blend on the back aren't quite the same thing. If provenance genuinely matters to you, the origin bar is the only part of the bag legally required to tell you the truth about it. Next, we move from geography to a different specialty markup, the ultra-fine pastry bag. Number 7, the double milled pastry tax ultra-fine pastry and cake flours, sold in small boutique bags at a steep per kilogram rate, promising a lighter, softer crumb for delicate baking that home bakers assume they can't get any other way. There's genuine science behind the claim. A lower protein, finer milled flour does typically produce a more tender result in cakes and biscuits, since less gluten development generally means a softer crumb. The catch is that ordinary supermarket plain flour often sits in a very similar protein range and produces a comparable result for most home recipes at a fraction of the cost. A large part of the steep price here simply comes from small pack sizes. A 500-gram specialty bag can carry a per kilogram cost several times higher than a standard 5-kilo sack, a difference that's easy to miss when you're only glancing at the smaller total on the shelf tag. For genuinely delicate French pastry work, the ultra-fine milling can make a real difference. For a Tuesday night sponge cake, it's worth checking whether your everyday plain flour would do the job for less. Let's shift from delicate baking to a much louder marketing angle. The gym bag. Number 6, the Fitties branded protein market bread. Market bread flour dressed in fitness brand packaging, leaning on words like strength and performance to justify a lifestyle price tag. Sometimes even sitting closer to the supplements aisle than the baking shelf, racked in the same visual language as a protein powder tub. The protein percentage on these bags is genuinely high, which is exactly what you want for a strong, well-risen loaf. The issue is that standard commercial bread or baker's flour, sold in a plain bag at a fraction of the price, frequently sits in the same high protein range without any of the athletic branding. The fitness packaging isn't adding gluten strength to the flour, it's adding a lifestyle association that happens to come with a noticeably higher price per kilogram. If you're already reaching for high protein flour for sourdough or strong bread doughs, that instinct is entirely correct and well-founded. The only question is whether the plain bread flour bag next to it on the shelf would get you the same result for less, and in most cases across this category, it will. From protein branding, let's talk about a premium that's genuinely earned, at least in part, organic certification. Number 5, the organic gold standard markup certified organic flour, often priced at 2 to 3 times the cost of a conventional bag sitting right beside it on the shelf. This one deserves more nuance than most entries on this list, because certified organic farming carries real documented extra costs, lower yields, stricter input restrictions, and ongoing certification and auditing fees that conventional growers simply don't pay. Some of that price gap is entirely legitimate, reflecting a genuinely different farming system built around avoiding synthetic pesticides and supporting long-term soil health. But industry pricing analysis consistently shows that grower payouts and certification costs don't account for the entire retail markup. A meaningful slice of that premium is standard retail margin, not extra cost passed down from the paddock. Breaking the price down roughly into 3 buckets helps. What the grower is paid, what certification genuinely costs, and what's simply added as retail margin because organic shoppers tend to be less price sensitive on average. So the honest takeaway isn't organic is a scam. It's that organic is worth paying for if chemical-free farming genuinely matters to you. While recognizing not every dollar of that premium makes it back to the farm, some of it is simply what the market will bear in a trusted certification logo. Now let's look at a category where the story gets milkier still. The single estate or artisan mill. Number 4, the single estate artisan mill boutique flour in bespoke, hand-labeled paper packaging, telling a story of small batch stone milling from a single named property, often with a paragraph about the miller's philosophy printed right on the bag alongside a sepia-toned photo of a miller's philosophy toned photo of a mill wheel. Genuine independent stone mills absolutely exist in Australia, and they can produce flour with real, distinct character that a large industrial roller mill doesn't replicate. Coarser texture, more of the bran and germ retained, a noticeably different flavour and a finished loaf. The issue is that some products leaning on this exact aesthetic are actually sourced from standard regional grain cooperatives, with wording vague enough to imply a single farm origin without technically claiming one. That's a legal but genuinely confusing label choice rather than an outright false claim, and it's hard to tell the two apart without digging. If a brand can name the specific mill, the region, and roughly when the grain was milled, that's a strong sign of real transparency worth paying for. If the story stays deliberately vague, no mill name, no date, no named grower, that vagueness itself is worth noticing before you pay an elite price for it. From artisan storytelling, we head toward the countdown's final stretch, a markup hiding in one of the most ordinary bags in the aisle. Number 3, the self-raising convenience. Surcharge's one of the most familiar bags in any Australian pantry, and one of the easiest places to quietly overpay without ever noticing. Self-raising flour is simply plain flour with a raising agent, typically baking powder, pre-mixed through it at a small standardized ratio. When you compare the price of a self-raising bag against buying plain flour and a tin of baking powder separately, the pre-mixed version routinely carries a noticeably high cost for what amounts to a 5-second step you could do yourself in the kitchen. There's a genuine convenience argument here. And for commercial kitchens producing consistent output at scale, pre-blending has real value. Nobody's suggesting a busy bakery hand mix every single batch that goes out the door. But for a home baker, mixing your own raising agent into plain flour costs a matter of cents, takes moments, and gives you fresher, better controlled leavening than a bag that's been sitting on a shelf for months, since raising agents do lose potency over time once opened. It's a small habit change with a surprisingly steady saving over a year of regular baking. If you've already spotted one of these markups in your own pantry, tell us which number surprised you most, and subscribe, because the final 2 entries expose the steepest price gaps in this entire investigation. Number 2, the Italian Rummistic Illusion. Domestic Illusion imported Italian Tipo 000 flour, prized by home pizza and pasta makers and priced accordingly once shipping, import duty, and imported prestige branding are all factored into the shelf price. The genuine technical claim behind one flour is its extremely fine milling and specific ash content, traits linked to a particular texture in pizza dough and fresh pasta. The one fresh Grastiger grading itself actually described how finely the bran has been sifted out, not a single fixed protein level. What's less settled is whether that exact result is only achievable with imported grain. A number of Australian mills now produce finely milled high extraction flours built specifically for pizza and pasta using local wheat at a considerably lower price once you strip out the freight and imported branding. Some professional pizza makers genuinely do prefer specific Italian wheat varieties for their particular gluten behavior, and that preference is legitimate rather than snobbery. Years of working with one flour builds real earned intuition. But for most home cooks, it's genuinely worth testing a locally milled pizza flour side by side with an imported brawn bag before assuming the import is doing something the domestic option simply can't. And that test brings us to the single biggest markup on this entire countdown. Number 1, the Celebrity Seat Whitey Label Luxury Ofinda Celebrity Endorsed and Chef Branded flour lines, sold at the steepest premium of anything on this list. These products lean entirely on a recognizable name and a polished lifestyle branded bag, positioned as somehow closer to what a professional baker would reach for at home. Across the packaged food industry more broadly, celebrity and lifestyle branded products are very commonly produced by large commercial co-packing mills, the same kind of facility supplying standard commercial flour, with the finished product simply repackaged under the famous name. This is standard practice across dozens of food categories, not unique to flour, and it's the same reason a supermarket's own home brand and a much pricier boutique product can sometimes roll off the very same production line at the very same facility. That's a completely legal way to bring a product to market. And some of these partnerships genuinely do support worthwhile causes or small culinary education programs tied to the celebrity's name. What it doesn't necessarily mean is that the wheat inside is milled any differently from a standard commercial bag sitting 2 shelves down at a fraction of the price. Before paying a premium for a famous name on a paper bag, it's worth checking whether the protein content and origin statement actually differ from the plain option beside it, because often they don't, and the only meaningfully different thing about the product is the photograph on the front. So what does a pattern like this, repeated across 9 very different products, actually tell us about how flour gets priced? Here's the pattern running underneath almost every entry on this list. Flour pricing in Australia is driven far more by branding, packaging, and story than by any dramatic difference in the wheat itself, once you actually line the numbers up side by side and compare them properly. Industry market analysis of the milling and agribusiness sector consistently shows that a large share of the retail price on a premium flour bag comes from marketing spend, distribution layers, and brand positioning rather than from meaningfully different grain genetics or farming input cost. Australian wheat is a genuinely well-regarded commodity on the world stage, milled to consistent, reliable standards regardless of which bag it ends up in, which is exactly why so much of what separates a $2 bag from a $12 bag comes down to everything layered on top of that base grain, not the grain itself. That doesn't mean every expensive bag is empty marketing. Genuine stone-milled artisan flour, certified organic farming, and specific specialty grains all carry real production costs. A mass-market roller mill simply doesn't have, and the growers and millers behind those products deserve to be paid fairly for that work, not squeezed by shoppers assuming every premium is automatically a con. The skill this whole investigation is really teaching isn't blanket cynicism. It's the ability to separate a price that reflects real extra cost from a price that reflects a good story and a nice font, a skill that carries over well beyond the baking aisle. Which brings us to exactly how to make that call every time you're standing in the baking aisle. Here's a 4-step system you can run on any flour bag in under 10 seconds. No special training or equipment needed. Step 1. Check the protein content per 100 grams on the nutrition panel and compare it directly against the cheaper bag next to it. If the numbers are close, the price gap isn't about baking performance. Step 2. Read the country of origin bar on the back, not the imagery on the front, especially if anything branded around a specific region, farm, or country. Step 3. Always calculate the actual price per kilogram, particularly for small specialty bags, since pack size is one of the easiest ways a steep markup hides in plain sight. A supermarket often prices small bags disproportionately higher than the standard size, purely because shoppers rarely do that division in their head. Step 4. Skip premix convenience products like self-raising flour when you bake often, and blend your own raising agent into plain flour instead. It takes seconds and it's dramatically cheaper over a year of regular baking. None of these steps require special equipment or baking expertise. Just 30 extra seconds with a bag already in your hand before it goes in the trolley. Run through it a handful of times at your usual supermarket and it becomes second nature. The same automatic habit as glancing at a use-by date, done without even thinking about it. Because a list like this can leave you feeling like every single bag on the shelf is out to catch you, it's worth saying clearly, plenty of genuinely honest flour sits on those same shelves, priced fairly and labelled straightforwardly. Look for millers, big and small, who print the actual origin region by name rather than a vague Australian-grown line, who list a real milling or best before date rather than just a batch code, and whose protein content on the label is backed by results that don't wildly shift from bag to bag. You'll find transparent, fairly priced options at Coles, Woolworths, and independent grocers alike, sitting right beside the boutique bags we've just picked apart. The honest ones just don't need the elaborate backstory to justify the price, because the numbers on the panel do that job on their own. The only real signal to look for is specificity, a named mill, a named region, a real date, printed plainly rather than implied through a nice font and a watercolor paddock. Brands willing to put a fact where a feeling would do are usually the ones worth trusting with your grocery budget. Flour hasn't stopped being one of the cheapest, most reliable staples in the entire supermarket. This investigation isn't an argument against baking, and it's certainly not an argument for grabbing the absolute cheapest bag on the shelf every single time regardless of what you're making. It's an argument against paying for packaging you mistook for performance. Every product on this list is completely legal, and several genuinely earn part of their premium through real extra cost in farming or milling that's worth paying for. The difference is knowing which part of that price tag is grain and which part is marketing. Check the protein number, check the origin statement, do the per kilo maths, and you'll never overpay for a wheat sheaf illustration again. Tell us in the comments which supermarket aisle deserves the same treatment next, because this investigation is only the beginning.